What do you do when a moment you've waited your whole life for, the kind you secretly build up in your heart like a private holiday, suddenly becomes the very moment that breaks you? Not in a grand, crashing way. Not with shouting or slamming doors. But quietly. Like a soft click that locks you out of your own life. That moment happened to me on a pale Sunday afternoon, the kind that looks like it was made for gentle things. The late March light was spilling across my kitchen counters, catching on the shine of freshly scrubbed tile. I'd just made myself a cup of Earl Grey, 3 minutes steeped, no more, no less, in the same chipped blue and white mug my husband once gave me. Even after all these years, I kept that routine like it was a prayer. Across from me sat my son, Ethan. 32 now, tall like his father had been, but with a restlessness in his foot tapping and a flicker in his eyes I couldn't quite read. He was scrolling his phone with one hand, the other absent-mindedly smoothing a crease in his jeans. I assumed it was just another casual check-in, one of those half-conversations we have when life gets busy and people forget to really connect. I had no idea what was coming. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked just slightly. I proposed. Sienna said yes. For a heartbeat, the world slowed. The steam from my mug curled in lazy spirals. I looked up, and there it was, that shine in his eyes, nervous and proud, like a boy showing off his first A+ on a test. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. That rare, aching joy when something too precious to ask for finally arrives. He was getting married. And for the first time since losing my husband, after years of being just Mom, and then Elaine, the widow, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter. Maybe even into something I could belong to again. Something bigger than just existing. I felt like I was coming back to life. "Oh, sweetheart." I grinned so wide it hurt. "That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." In my mind, 1,000 lovely images unfolded, a lace train trailing down a garden aisle, soft strings playing under a canopy of lights, champagne flutes catching the golden hour sun. I imagined helping plan every part of it, not to control it, of course, just to be involved. I'd spent over 3 decades as a wedding planner in New England, known in every venue from rustic barns in the Berkshires to penthouse ballrooms overlooking the harbor. Even after retiring, I kept my binders, my vendor lists, my tricks for perfect lighting and floral charm. But this would be our wedding. "I already have some ideas," I said, almost laughing from excitement. "Just little things. No pressure. You know I won't step on any toes, I just love to help, even in the background." Ethan looked up. And for a split second, his eyes darted away. That's when I felt the first tremor. The faint crack in the glass of what had felt like a dream. "Actually," he said slowly, "Sienna kind of already has a vision. She's into modern minimalist stuff. She follows this planner on social who does these really sleek, curated events. She's thinking about hiring her." "Oh," I said. I blinked, trying not to let the disappointment color my voice. "Of course. I just figured, since it's a family thing, maybe I could help with a few parts. Not the whole thing. Just a little." And then, the sentence. The one that changed everything. She said, and please don't take this the wrong way, she said it'd be best if you just stayed in your lane. Silence. I stared at him. I smiled, too wide and too fake. "Stayed in my lane?" I repeated, hoping he'd laugh, say it was a joke, walk it back. But he didn't. He just gave me a weak shrug. "You know how she is. She just wants to avoid confusion. She thinks it'll go smoother that way." And there it was. The joy in my chest turned to something brittle and sharp. I nodded, excused myself a few minutes later, mumbling about a Zoom call with an old colleague from my planning days. There was no call. I just needed to be alone. I lay on my bed in the dark, the window open a crack, the sky outside slipping from lavender to navy. And I tried to remember every time I'd helped another mother of the groom feel special. Every teary-eyed toast, every moment of joy I had built for someone else's family. Now, after all those years, my son was telling me I didn't belong. That I wasn't needed. I didn't cry. I just lay very still. And something inside me, some fragile, hopeful thing, shifted. Not shattered. Not yet. But bent, like a tree leaning away from the storm. They say when people pull away from you, they don't always slam the door. Sometimes, they just let it drift shut behind them, so soft, so gradual, you don't even notice until the silence starts to echo. The days after that conversation with Ethan felt exactly like that. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe Sienna hadn't meant it harshly, that Ethan was just trying to keep the peace. Maybe they were just overwhelmed. Engagements were busy, right? Full of to-do lists and Pinterest boards and too many opinions. But deep down, I felt it. The shift. The warmth in Ethan's voice during our calls began to fade, like a song you once knew by heart but hadn't heard in years. He checked in with quick texts, surface-level updates. No more long conversations over tea. No more laughter that lingered. And Sienna? She didn't reach out once. I kept my optimism alive the way you keep a candle burning in the wind, cupping it with your hands, guarding it with hope. I thought, maybe if I give them space. Maybe if I show I'm not trying to take over. Then came the lunch. A casual invitation, sent by Sienna through text. A few of her friends and her mother were meeting at a local cafe to talk wedding vibes. That's what the message said. Wedding vibes. Not planning. Not discussion. Just vibes. Still, I said yes. I wanted to believe that maybe this was the olive branch. Maybe this was Sienna's way of including me, even if just a little. I pulled out a soft peach blouse from the back of my closet and slipped on my gold hoop earrings. I wanted to look kind, not imposing. Fresh, not outdated. Before I left, I tucked a slim folder into my bag. Inside were printouts of inspiration boards I had created, nothing flashy. Just elegant color palettes, seasonal florals that worked across budgets, tips for lighting and photo angles. Things I had collected over the years like pressed flowers in a book. Memories turned into tools. When I arrived, everyone was already seated. Sienna glanced up from her phone with a bored "hey." Her friends gave half smiles, more out of habit than warmth. Her mother, Lori, offered a practiced nod, her nails painted the same steely gray as her expression. I ordered a chamomile tea and tried to settle in, listening as they gushed over venues with exposed brick and open bars, caterers who offered vegan charcuterie, and a wedding planner from LA who only works with a handful of clients per year. When the topic finally turned toward decor, I quietly opened my folder. I brought a few things, I said gently, placing it on the table. Just some thoughts. Ideas I've found that work really well in different settings. Nothing major. Sienna barely looked up. She waved a hand. Oh, that's okay, Elaine. We're doing something more current, nothing too traditional. The way she said traditional, like it was a disease. A thing to avoid. She added, I'm sure you've got a lot of great stuff from, like, back then. But weddings have really changed, right? Her friends chuckled, one of them tossing her hair and saying, yeah, everything's TikTok now. The sting was sharp. But I smiled anyway. Folded the folder closed without a word and slipped it quietly back into my purse. Lori leaned toward Sienna and whispered, not nearly quietly enough, told you she'd bring something. Probably thought she'd run the whole thing. Sienna turned to me, all sugar and steel. We really do appreciate your excitement, Elaine. Truly. But I already have such a clear vision. I just want this to be ours, you know? Fresh. Modern. I nodded. Of course. It was their day. But I couldn't stop the memories that bubbled up, of other brides I had helped, women who had hugged me with teary eyes and whispered thank yous at midnight while slipping off their heels. Women who had seen me. Now I was being treated like a relic in a museum. Something mildly interesting, but behind glass. When I got home, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, the engine off, the radio murmuring something soft. I thought about calling Ethan. About telling him how his fiancée had humiliated me in front of her friends. About the look on Lori's face, the smirks, the condescension. But what would I even say? He'd tell me I was overreacting. That Sienna didn't mean anything by it. That I was reading into things. So instead, I did what I had done far too many times in my life. I swallowed it. I made myself a cup of tea. I changed into the soft flannel pajamas I wore on nights when I needed to feel like I still belonged to something. I watched an old episode of The Golden Girls and laughed too loudly at lines I'd heard 100 times. But something was shifting inside me. A small crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself. The lines near my eyes, the silver in my hair, the sturdiness in my posture that had taken decades to earn. And in a voice barely above a whisper, I said aloud, "You deserve better than this." I didn't fully believe it yet. But it was the first time I'd ever said it out loud. And sometimes, that's where the road begins. There's a peculiar kind of hurt that settles in when you're technically included, but only just enough to be dismissed. I call it courtesy inclusion. The kind that says, you can come, but don't expect to be heard. That was the tone of everything after the cafe lunch. Ethan's calls became even more infrequent, like he was checking in just enough to silence guilt. And Sienna? Still silent. As though she decided I had already played my part, some quiet background character meant to nod and smile from the sidelines. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I reminded myself that weddings bring stress, that everyone gets a little tense under the pressure of expectations. Maybe Sienna was trying to prove herself to Lori. Maybe Ethan was caught in the middle. I told myself to be patient. Graceful. So I tried again. That week, I sent over a short email with a few local vendors I trusted, florists, bakers, lighting specialists. All people I'd worked with for years. I kept the tone light, signed it with, "Only if it's helpful, wishing you both a joyful planning journey. With love, Mom." Days passed. No reply. From either of them. Silence. That silence, I would later learn, was the sound of being quietly erased. A few days after that, I decided to drop off a small box at Ethan's apartment, childhood keepsakes, photo albums, his old baseball cards, a couple of faded drawings from second grade that once lived on the fridge. Things I thought they might want to include in a wedding slideshow or display. Sienna answered the door. She smiled. That tight, performative smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hey. We didn't know you were stopping by." I held up the box. "Just thought these might be useful. Maybe for the wedding? Some photos of Ethan, a few memories. Might add a personal touch." She took the box but didn't look inside. "That's sweet," she said, already turning. "But we're kind of doing a digital thing, just pulling photos from our phones. More casual. More curated, I thought." Ethan appeared behind her. His expression said it all, caught between loyalty and discomfort. "Hey, Mom," he said, hugging me quickly. "You really didn't have to come all the way over. You could have just dropped it off." "I was nearby," I lied. "Thought I'd say hi." Sienna stepped in. "Actually, we're heading to a venue appointment." "Oh?" I asked. "You found a place?" "Yeah. Rooftop downtown. Very us. Chic but not stuffy." I nodded, masking the sting. "Did you think about the Elmwood estate? I know the owners, they do stunning outdoor ceremonies, really magical in the late spring." Sienna's smile flickered. "It's a little dated. We want to avoid anything that feels too, Mom and Dad wedding." The words landed like ice water. Casual, dismissive. Not even cruel, just indifferent. I forced a laugh. Right. Of course. They said goodbye and shut the door before I even made it to the elevator. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the thick binders that had once held my life's work: fabric swatches, vendor contracts, seating charts, floral sketches, notes scribbled during midnight calls from tearful brides. Now, all of it, decades of skill, of effort, of love, was reduced to a punchline. Outdated. Not their vibe. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the way it had been done. Polite. Clean. Clinical. Like surgical rejection. Still, I made one final effort. I invited them to dinner, homemade pot roast, Ethan's childhood favorite. I set the table with linen napkins, lit a few candles, and baked an apple cinnamon pie from scratch. They arrived 30 minutes late. Sienna wrinkled her nose as soon as she stepped inside. "Oh wow, it's really intense in here. I don't really eat red meat." I smiled and said nothing. Ethan shrugged and pulled out a chair. Dinner was awkward. I tried to ask about the planning, venues, music, her dress. But Sienna gave clipped answers. Vague smiles. Like she was doing her part in a scene she didn't care to be in. At one point, as I poured tea, I gently mentioned a seamstress I knew who still made custom gowns by hand. Sienna set her cup down a little too firmly. "Elaine," she said, "I know you mean well, but I just feel like you're not hearing us. We're doing something different. It's not the 90s. We already have someone in mind, this incredible planner from the West Coast. She did this sustainable desert elopement that was so dreamy." Ethan stayed silent. I nodded, even as I felt myself fracturing. "Well," I said softly, "I hope it's everything you want it to be." She smiled brightly. "It will be. I just want everyone to stay in their lane so it all goes smoothly." There it was again. Stay in your lane. No longer a suggestion. Now a command. A boundary, drawn in ink. One that placed me clearly outside the picture. After they left, I stood in the kitchen staring at the empty table. The napkins still folded. The pie untouched. That's when I knew. I wasn't invited into this story, not truly. And if I wasn't welcome at the table, I'd stop bringing the meal. You want me to stay in my lane? Fine. But be careful what road you push people down. Because sometimes, that lane leads away from you, and it doesn't circle back. They say heartbreak comes in many forms. For me, it didn't arrive with a scream or a slammed door. It came in the form of a paper check. Folded neatly into a pale ivory envelope. Placed quietly into a mailbox without a word. The day after that dinner, the one where I was told, yet again, to stay in my lane, I sat alone with my morning coffee and pulled out the worn leather notebook that I had kept hidden in a drawer for over 20 years. The cover was soft and creased at the corners. Inside were numbers. Scribbles. Dates. Notes in my late husband's handwriting, strong and careful, for Ethan's day. Make it count. It was the wedding fund. Years of putting a little aside. 100 here, 50 there. Birthday money not spent, bonuses not celebrated. We'd never had a grand wedding of our own, my husband and I, just a courthouse, a simple ring, and a lot of love. But we promised that one day, we'd give our child the celebration we never had. A wedding that said, "You are deeply loved." And I had held on to that promise, even after I lost him. Through holidays where the chair beside me stayed empty. Through years where it felt like the world had moved on and I hadn't. But love, I've learned, is not blind. Love sees the truth, and chooses to act anyway. And in that moment, I could see the truth clearly. Ethan had chosen someone who didn't see me. Someone who saw my experience, my care, my wisdom, as a threat to her image. A blemish on her aesthetic. I wasn't about to fund my own erasure. So I took the checkbook, withdrew the money, and transferred it quietly into a new account, under my name alone. I left a small amount in the joint one, enough to keep appearances. Then I sat down and wrote a note. Dear Ethan and Sienna. As you prepare for your big day, I wanted to offer a small contribution. I trust you'll make it meaningful in your own way. Wishing you both joy always. With love. Mom. I included a modest check. Not the full fund. Just enough to be gracious, and no more. I mailed it without ceremony. Without a text. Without an announcement. A boundary, finally drawn. A week passed. No reply. Then one evening, Ethan showed up on my porch unannounced. When I opened the door, I saw it on his face: tension, guilt, confusion. The look of a man beginning to feel the consequences of silence. Can we talk? He asked, eyes darting from mine to the floor. We sat in the living room, and I offered tea. He declined. He didn't waste time. Sienna saw the check, he said. She was surprised. I imagined she was, I said, calmly. She thought. He hesitated. Well, we thought you were going to cover more. Maybe, the whole thing. I changed my mind. His brow furrowed. Why? I looked at him, really looked. My son, who I had raised with bedtime stories and scraped knees and birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs. My son, who had once cried into my lap because the other kids didn't invite him to their treehouse. And now, he had built one I wasn't allowed into. Because I wasn't invited to be part of anything, I said gently. Not the decisions. Not the venue. Not the vision. I was asked to stay in my lane, so I did. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's not fair, he said finally. Sienna just wants control. She gets overwhelmed. She's trying to make things perfect. Perfect, I said softly, doesn't mean excluding the people who love you. He didn't answer. She feels like you don't support her, he added, almost defensively. I tilted my head. Is that because I brought ideas? Because I offered to help? Because I showed her pictures of your childhood? He looked down. I wasn't going to say anything, I continued. I was going to keep swallowing it, smiling through it. But Ethan, you let it happen. You stood there and watched me be erased. The silence in the room was thick. So that's it? He asked after a while. You're not going to help at all? I did help, I said. In the way I was invited to. He rubbed the back of his neck. Sienna's going to freak out. I didn't flinch. Because I was done offering comfort for pain I didn't cause. He left not long after, mumbling a goodbye that felt more like an apology he didn't know how to form. And for the first time, I didn't cry after he walked out. Because I wasn't mourning the money. I was mourning the moment that never came, the moment where I got to be the mother of the groom in a family that saw me. The trouble with illusions is that they shimmer, right until they shatter. A few days after that conversation with Ethan, the cracks in the facade finally began to show. It started with a phone call, one I almost ignored. I was pruning the roses in the backyard when the phone buzzed in my pocket. I saw Ethan's name and hesitated, my shears frozen mid-snip. I answered, breath held. She's gone, he said. For a moment, I didn't understand. Who? Nova Ray. The planner. She took the deposit. $55,000. Her website's down, her number's dead, her Instagram's wiped. We've been scammed. I sank slowly onto the garden bench, the shears still in my hand, their weight suddenly too heavy. All of it? I asked. All of it, he said, voice brittle. Every penny. She had contracts, testimonials, photos. Sienna said she was legit. But now, it's all gone. What does Sienna say? Silence. She's not talking to me, he finally admitted. She says this wouldn't have happened if we just used your money. There it was. Blame, sharp and selfish. Deflection dressed up as grief. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture. I simply said, "That's not true. This didn't happen because I withheld money. It happened because you both assumed you had it, because you treated it like a guarantee." Ethan didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, I heard whispers through mutual friends, quiet ripples in the community. The wedding was postponed, but even that word was stretched thin. Vendors were backing out. Deposits were lost. Tension turned into arguments, and arguments into distance. By the end of the month, the engagement was over. Sienna moved back in with her mother. Ethan stayed in the apartment alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I stayed in my lane. And from that lane, I watched everything unravel. Because when you build a wedding on ego, exclusion, and aesthetics, without space for wisdom, love, or humility, eventually, the whole thing collapses under its own weight. A few months went by, slow and quiet. The silence burned at first. I'd check my phone more than I wanted to admit, half hoping for a message. An apology. Something. But it never came. No thank you. No explanation. No, you were right. He had vanished into the wreckage of a dream he built without me. And I began to let go. I filled my time with simple things, long walks at dawn, soup bubbling on the stove, afternoons curled up with a book and no company but the pages. I joined a small ceramics class and made a bowl so lopsided it looked like it was melting, and I laughed harder than I had in years. I went to lunch with Dorothy, an old friend from church, who reminded me that friendship isn't measured by frequency, but by presence. She told me about her daughter's wedding, simple, sweet, full of hiccups, and how it still made her smile years later. "Perfect's a lie," she said, sipping her tea. "It's the messy parts that make it real." I nodded. I understood now. I wasn't just mourning a wedding. I was grieving the version of myself I had tried to become for everyone else, the helper, the fixer, the peacemaker, the silent supporter. And one evening, while organizing old boxes in the attic, I found a picture of myself from decades ago, holding baby Ethan on my hip, laughing, radiant. I didn't recognize the woman at first. But slowly, I began to. She had been strong. She had been enough. A week later, I ran into Cheryl, my neighbor, at the grocery store. She leaned in close, eyes gleaming with the kind of gossip she couldn't quite hide. "Did you hear?" she asked. I already knew what she was going to say. "They called it off. Sienna and Ethan." She moved out, her mom came to help pack. I nodded gently, added a carton of eggs to my basket. "She's telling people Ethan ruined it," Cheryl added, lowering her voice. "But I heard they were already fighting before the planner thing. Something about control." I didn't reply. Because I knew. It had never really been about the planner, or the money. It had been about power. About image. About the need to perform a perfect life for the world, even if it meant burning the real one to the ground. Later that night, I sat alone in my living room, the light from the fireplace flickering across the floor. I stared into the quiet, not with sadness, but with clarity. Because I finally understood. Love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't demand you disappear. It doesn't reward silence, and it certainly doesn't bloom from exclusion. Real love says, "Come as you are." Real love makes room at the table, even for the ones who've said it 1,000 times before. The seasons had shifted by the time I saw Ethan again. It was late October. The air had that unmistakable crispness to it, biting just enough to remind you that change was inescapable, but not yet bitter. I had spent the afternoon leading a small workshop at the community center, helping young brides with tight budgets plan their weddings. Nothing flashy, just honest advice, shared over coffee and laughter. I didn't do it for money. I did it because it mattered. Because they listened. Because I remembered what it felt like to be heard. That evening, as I stepped through the fallen leaves on my walkway, there he was. Ethan. Standing at the gate. Thinner. Paler. Shoulders no longer squared by pride, but sloped by something heavier. "Hi, Mom. That word hit different now. Not out of guilt, but out of grace. I didn't say anything right away. Just unlocked the gate and opened it. You hungry? I asked. He nodded. Starving. Over dinner, we didn't talk about Sienna. We didn't need to. Instead, we talked about small things. His job. A book he'd been reading. A podcast about urban gardening. The kind of conversation that meant more for what was beneath the words than in them. After the dishes were cleared and the kettle began its soft whistle, he said her name. Her name's Harper. I turned to face him. She's different, he said, voice gentler now. Soft. Kind. She asks questions. She listens. He paused. She asked about you. The first time I told her about my past, not the wedding, not Sienna. You. She said she wanted to meet the woman who raised me. Something stirred in me. Not joy, not yet. But a cautious hope, like the first green bud on a tree that survived a long winter. She's not trying to prove anything, he added. She doesn't need to control the story. She just wants to build something real. I handed him a cup of tea. Our old rhythm returned, quiet and unspoken. And you? I asked. I want to do it right this time, he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photo, Harper, standing in a garden, her hair catching the light like it had been painted there, holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers. She said, if we ever get married, she'd want you to plan it. Said it would be an honor. My fingers lingered on the edge of the photo a little longer than necessary. I didn't need to be asked twice. I'd like that, I said. And I meant it. Not because it was a second chance at planning a wedding, but because for the first time, I was being invited in. Not expected. Not tolerated. Included. Over the weeks that followed, Harper and I grew close. She started stopping by with coffee. We'd spend Saturday mornings poring over fabric swatches, laughing about trends we both found ridiculous. She wanted something simple, something joyful, something true. They chose a small garden just outside the city, nothing grand, but rich in meaning. A place Ethan used to ride his bike past when he was little, when he'd beg me to stop and let him roll down the grassy hill until he was breathless with laughter. The ceremony would be intimate. Close family. A few friends. No influencers. No hashtags. Just love, and light, and space to breathe. One afternoon, while finalizing the details, Harper looked at me and said, "You're so good at this, Elaine. I wish I'd known you sooner. You've made everything feel real." That moment? That was the one I had waited for all along. Not the apology. Not the recognition. Just that quiet, genuine seeing. On the day of the wedding, the sky was a watercolor of soft blues and golds. Ethan stood at the front, his hands trembling just enough to remind everyone that this was not a performance. It was a promise. And when Harper walked down the aisle, there was no spectacle, just grace. Simple, grounded, breathtaking. Their vows weren't perfect. They were honest. They promised to choose each other, again and again, even on the days when choosing felt hard. And in that moment, I realized something. The healing I had searched for didn't need to come from someone else. It had come from me. I had already forgiven. I had already let go. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about returning, to myself, to the love I had always given so freely, and to the place where I was finally seen not as a prop, but as a person. That evening, Harper came over to me and placed her hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of tears. "You were the heart of this, Elaine," she whispered. "I can't imagine this day without you." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trying to earn my place. I simply was. Some moments in life don't come with an audience. There's no standing ovation. No spotlight. No well-timed applause. Just you, alone in a quiet room, finally realizing that enough was always yours to define. I used to think healing needed acknowledgement. That in order to truly move on, I'd need someone to say, "I'm sorry." But healing, I've learned, doesn't wait for permission. It happens in silence. In the small, private victories no one else will ever see. It happens when you set the table for one, and still light the candles. When you choose to show up for yourself the way you've shown up for everyone else. When you stop chasing the version of you someone else wanted, and come home to the one you left waiting. It wasn't the wedding I lost. It wasn't even the sun. It was the illusion that if I loved hard enough, tried gently enough, gave quietly enough, they'd make space for me. But space isn't something you beg for. It's something you build, for yourself, with your own hands, even if it starts with rubble. And now? Now I no longer confuse being needed with being valued. Now I no longer offer softness where it will be weaponized. Now I know that love without respect is just decoration, all glitter, no gold. And somewhere along the way, without fanfare, without a stage, I found myself again. Not the version who walked on eggshells, not the one who swallowed hurt in pretty packaging, but the version who knows that staying in your lane isn't silence, it's sovereignty. That boundaries aren't barriers, they're bridges back to yourself. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do, is not show up where you're no longer seen. So no, there was no applause. No grand moment of recognition. Just me, standing in the quiet, whole and steady. Finally understanding that the love I was waiting for was never theirs to give. It was mine, all along.